On this episode of the CBD University podcast, we are going inside the cannabis industry with one of the leading legal advocates for our burgeoning industry. With the laws governing our industry constantly changing, learn about what it takes to stay on top as an industry leader. This is the CBD University podcast, and it starts right now. I'm Joe Augustinelli, the host of the CBD University podcast from Global Widget. If you are a returning listener, thank you for tuning in once again. And if you are a new listener, we are glad you found us on your favorite podcast app. And we'll break down some of the apps that we are on a little later on in the show and let you know where and how you can subscribe to our podcast. And we'll also welcome our viewers to the Global Widget YouTube channel, where you can see full videos of all of our past podcast episodes. And on this episode, it's always fun when we have somebody from outside the organization here on the podcast, and I welcome one of the top legal advocates in the industry, and we'll let you know how you can keep on top of everything happening and changing in the industry with a stern focus on quality and compliance here at Global Widget. It's great to welcome in Rod Kite to our podcast. Rod, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Joe, for having me. This is great.
And Rod, first, let's get right into it. And for those of you on our YouTube channel who can see our monitor in studio, that is Rod's website that you can see on the TV screen. And we'll talk a little bit about that and the blog and everything else you're doing. But a little background about yourself and how you got involved in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a lawyer. I represent businesses in the cannabis industry with a real focus on hemp and CBD. And I've been doing this for about 5 years. My entry into the industry came in the wake of the enactment of the 2014 Farm Bill, which for the first time in history at the federal level legalized a form of cannabis that it called industrial hemp at the time. And so my personal interest in representing businesses in the cannabis industry first stems from a passion for the plant that I've had for several decades. But I also have a personal experience. I had chemotherapy for testicular cancer about 10 years ago. And during that experience, I used cannabis, and it really helped me through my chemotherapy. It helped with the nausea, it helped with the pains, and helped me to sleep, and all the things that go along with chemotherapy. And it was using cannabis during that experience and seeing how positively it impacted me and my health that I realized that I wanted, and in fact just felt compelled to get involved in the industry. And so that was my path towards changing my career from representing businesses in general to representing businesses specifically in this industry.
And may I ask, how is the how has the cancer fight?
Thank you. It's I've been in remission for years.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yep.
Great to hear. So, we talked about what got you into the industry, and you're also an author for Cannabis Business Law. Did I get that right?
That's right.
That's your blog, and
so I wrote a book back in over sort of the 2014 first part of 2015 year, and the idea was a book that would help lawyers who were new to the industry, but also business people who were wanting to get into the cannabis industry at large to understand the lay of the land. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and I wanted to say, these are the issues that are out there, and with each chapter focused on, taxes or real estate or legal issues like federalism and the federal and state divide as far as how the laws play out. So I wrote that book, and it was published in 2015, and then I started my blog, the Kite on Cannabis blog, shortly thereafter, and the goal of the blog is to take issues that I see from clients, cutting edge issues, what are clients facing, and then to give a meaningful analysis so that they can take that and learn something from it.
So 2014, we're now in just approaching 2020, so yes. 6 years. I'm sure the topics and writings have changed quite a bit.
They have. It's kind of funny, actually. Some of them have changed a bit. Some of them are the same old things, because the CBD industry has just, blossomed. During that 5 year period, it's really taken its arc. And in the cannabis industry at large, though, we still have these issues with the federal government and issues like taxes and whatnot that we face. But the hemp and CBD industry during that time period has been like a rocket ship. It's been a quick 5 years, that's for sure.
And obviously, with a industry that changes as much as this one does, education is key. We here at Global Widget know that, and that's one of the reasons behind the podcast, not only for consumers, but for wholesale and distribution partners that we're proud to partner with. What challenges do you see consumers and businesses facing as we enter 2020 with this industry in regards to the products that are available on the market today?
Yeah, Joe, I think your point about education is really crucial. And so, the distributors are having to assimilate a whole lot of information. And if you go online and Google stuff, just like probably Googling anything, you're going to find a wide range of answers to any particular issue, many of which will just frankly be wrong. And so I think getting educated properly to understand, certainly what the legal issues are is vital. But consumers are at a place where they have to be educated as well. And sometimes it's hard for a consumer to find, good information and information that's reliable. But, as far as trends going forward, the industry, I've heard that hemp, which, hemp-derived CBD is what's legal and is what's really driving the CBD industry, is going to be the third largest agricultural crop in the United States this coming year for 2020. And so that tells you a lot about CBD. I think we're going to see a lot of the companies that have been, unwilling to get involved begin to get involved, and I think we may see a correction of sorts where some of the smaller CBD companies are either going to the wayside or being bought up by some of the larger companies.
And as we talk about the constant changes in the industry, I know recently, back in October, I think it was, we had the USDA,
right,
and some of the new federal hemp production rules. And as a subscriber to your blog, I see all the emails that have come out on that. So I'll bring our listeners up to speed on what has been mentioned so far.
Yes, so the USDA issued an interim final rule on Halloween, October 31st, 2019. And what those rules have been anticipated, but what they are to help regulate the production of hemp under the 2018 Farm Bill. Just as a little bit of background, Congress every 3 to 5 years enacts a farm bill, and it's hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of dense statutory language encompassing all aspects of farming. Well, in the 2018 Farm Bill, there were provisions that broadly legalized hemp, and any sort of statute, particularly something involving farming, you need the governing agencies, in this case the USDA, to issue regulations as to how those statutes are going to be implemented. And so the USDA regulations came out just at the point we're talking right now, just about a month and a half ago, and we're still working through them. In fact, we're still in the comment period. So if you're listening to this before December 30th, 2019, and you have read the regulations and have some comments for it, you can still go and make a comment, and the USDA will consider that and may change or modify the regulations.
And after a comment period, how long before something may be finalized?
Right. We're talking a year or two. These are government agencies,
yeah.
and they take a little bit longer than we'd like in a lot of times. But there's a lot to assimilate and a lot to put together.
And as we continue to await guidance from the FDA on CBD products, but as mentioned in your blog, because of the role that CBD plays in health, this entire industry has emerged to deliver CBD products of, just about, any magnitude. And we here at Global Widget across our 3 brands have, whether it's edibles, oils, tinctures, topicals. What can consumers do to make sure they're aligning themselves with products that are of the highest quality and compliant with local, state, and federal regulations that are out there?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the first thing is what you do with any product. Nowadays online, you can go and you can read reviews, and you can check out from reputable websites where there have been reviews. You can also go to the manufacturer or the website itself and read about the products, and say, okay, well, from a basic standpoint, do these products comply with the law? Or, are they CBD products derived from hemp? Do they contain no more than 0.3% delta-9 THC? And are they following just good manufacturing practices? And a lot of that's apparent just from the website itself. And I think in this day and age, we're so computer focused, but certainly you can also reach out to the manufacturer and if you have specific questions or concerns, whether by phone or by email. And I think a good producer will respond.
And in your eyes, how have you seen Global Widget and its in-house manufacturing, distribution, quality, and compliance teams positioned itself to stay ahead of the curve regarding industry regulations?
All right. Well, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with Global Widget for a long time and to watch it evolve. And the thing that really has always impressed me is that Global Widget stays focused on where things are going and where they need to be. So this industry has emerged from almost literally nothing to multi-billion-dollar industry in a span of just a few years. And over that time, it's just been a constant learning curve, a constant ramping up of all of the, everything from labeling to production to distribution to, interacting with consumers and all of those things. And Global Widget on all of those fronts has worked very hard to stay ahead of the curve as to where it needs to be and where the industry is going.
And talking about where the industry's going. So we're just a few weeks out here before the start of 2020. If you're listening to this podcast when it was first uploaded and maybe before the end of the year, as we head into 2020, what do you see some of the biggest challenges faced in the industry? And, as maybe the first quarter of the year, what are you looking to see come out of headlines?
Yeah, so if we there's kind of two ways to think about this, and one is the cannabis industry at large. And I say and I'll have a little bit of a sidetrack here. I'm using the term cannabis in a botanical sense for the plant. From a legal standpoint, cannabis is divided into two separate categories. There's marijuana, which is federally illegal, and it is lawful under some state laws, and then there is hemp, which is federally and state legal. And the only distinction from a legal level is their concentrations of THC. But cannabis is the plant. And as we've seen from the cannabis industry, in a lot of the companies that are publicly traded in Canada have released their third quarter reports and lost tens of millions of dollars in the third quarter. And so I think when an industry has businesses that are on track to lose $100 million in a year, obviously some changes and some corrections are due. So on the one hand, I think, and we're seeing prices for hemp and CBD just continue to drop. And that is going to cause a lot of consternation among certain segments in the industry. But of course, whenever you have that, you also have opportunities for other pieces of the industry. And so I think we're going to have a buyer's market for the first part of the year, certainly. And I also think that we're going to see a situation in which companies that have been planning to be GMP compliant have been, the resources to kind of push through on this large scale global correction in the market are going to do really well, frankly.
And before we get to some of your extracurricular activities, which I discovered online, we'll just talk a little bit about your blog. And Kite on Cannabis is your blog that listeners can subscribe to. How do they go about doing that, and what type of information do you write about from time to time?
Yeah, sure. So it's the blog is kiteoncannabis.com. That's KIGHTON cannabis.com. My name is like Night or Light, but with a K instead of an N
I
or an L.
only slipped once during the podcast.
You did a great job
during the podcast.
For
I said
my
it
whole
once,
life.
and it was the last mention I had to make.
You've done phenomenal. Since I was a kid, I've gone by Night, and I don't care at all. I just want to make sure that people get to the right spot. So it's Kite on Cannabis. You can also access it through my website, which is cannabusiness.law. It has the blog embedded in that. And so we write, and I say I do most of the writing, but I also have some attorneys, associate attorneys in the office that write usually a blog post or two every month. And we also post blogs or articles from outside sources, scientists or people in the industry, other lawyers occasionally who have something that's important to say. But the concept for the blog is, this is an industry where education is really vital, and there's a lot of misinformation. And rather than hiding the ball, I think it's important to put it all out there, to educate the public, and to raise the issues that we're seeing and analyze those issues. A lot of times, this is not an area of law where a lot of things are fixed. I can't tell you how often I'll get a call from a client and they'll say, well, this happened, or we want to do this, can we or should we? And there are no regulations governing that particular thing. And so we have to make a decision. Okay, well, where the regulation's likely to be 6 or 12 months from now, what is a good policy position to take for the company and also for the industry at large. And there's a lot of just gray area. And so we try to take those issues and analyze them and educate people and to be able to make positive and progressive decisions that will work for themselves and for the industry. So that's a long way of saying we analyze issues that are facing the industry.
And as I mentioned, being completely transparent, subscribe to your blog and find it very educational and informative. So I do invite our listeners to take advantage of that opportunity to stay on top of everything in the industry from your blog and subscribe to it.
Thanks. So you can do it by the website. There's just a little, you key in your name and email, and I believe, I didn't set this up on the website, you'll get a confirmation email, but it's free.
You will.
And we post, we won't pound your inbox. We usually release on average probably 1 to 3 articles per week. So it's just topical issues that are out there.
So you're an attorney, you have a blog, and I've also discovered through some research that how long have you been in a rock band?
Most of my life, I should say. I play in a rock band right now called Hard Rocket, and you can find us on Facebook or Instagram. But I've played guitar since I was 12 years old. It's always been a passion for me. And I'm fortunate enough to live in a city, Asheville, North Carolina, that has a real thriving music scene, and I found some fellow musicians that are really fun to play with. And we gig as often as we can. We're all middle-aged with kids and jobs, but we find time to usually rehearse once a week and on average play out and then gig about once a week. It's a blast.
So do you have a favorite musician or band outside of your own?
Oh, that's so hard to say, right? Well, there's 2 levels, right? There's like the bands that I grew up loving, Allman Brothers and Santana, and then later, I was big into Fish and that whole scene for a while. But now I love straight up kind of rock music that's out. I love Portugal the Man. But then in Asheville, there's a really good rock music scene. There's a great band called Modern Strangers. There's a great band called John Kirby and the New Seniors, and we just got. So I love them, nowadays as much as I love some of the big name acts.
My brother lives up that way, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah, I'll have to find exactly. You think I would have, and I did. I had no idea that you lived in Asheville until you just mentioned it. I didn't get to that part of the research on the website, but. I'll have to check, and then I'll let you know off air exactly where he lives. But yeah, he's right up that way. So
let me know.
I'll absolutely let you know. So, last question. We'll stick on the rock side, and then we'll wrap things up here. Favorite song to play, or do you have a favorite original song? Have you written?
Oh gosh, right now probably my favorite song to play is Mount Zeppelin. It's one of our originals. We do a lot of instrumentals. It's about a 5 or 7 minute just rock and roll instrumental. It's fun.
Awesome. Well, I invite the listeners, all the links that we talked about on today's podcast episode will be right in the description of the podcast. And not to mention, you can also follow Rod and his band, too, if you are into rock music on Facebook and Instagram. So, Rod Kite, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your always busy schedule to join us here in studio at the Global Widget headquarters in Tampa and appear on our podcast. And I'm sure we'll... be in touch again very soon for another episode.
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for tuning into this episode of the CBD University podcast. A couple of reminders, listeners, you can find us and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. And we are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, Stitcher, and more. Plus, catch full episodes with video on the Global Widget YouTube channels. That wave to one of our cameras. And don't forget to submit your questions for future episodes of our podcast, in which we will get through the viewer and listener mailbag. And you can submit your questions to podcast@globalwidget.com. I'm Joe Augustinelli, the host of the CBD University podcast, and thanks for tuning in. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. CBD products are not intended to treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition. Always consult your personal physician about CBD and using CBD products. CBD should never be used by anyone under the age of 18. This podcast is not intended to provide legal advice regarding the legal status of CBD and CBD products.